We've had an interesting day. We've had a lot of discussions. I've quite enjoyed the fact that it hasn't been this kind of conference where everybody just agrees with each other, but actually we have different points, even though I think we agree with each other that this is a very important conference and on the task of equality data. So that is a main point. And now we've come actually to the third session that will focus on possibilities for from the perspective of civil society. And to lead us through this session, we have with us Tamas Kadar. So Tamas, please come up. Let's give him a warm applause. Tamas is the co-director of Equinet, the European network of equality bodies. And previously, you worked with the Hungarian Equal Treatment Authority as a legal advisor, also investigating discrimination cases. And before I hand over to you, because I know you're going to lead a session with a lot of people, but can you tell me something about Equinet for those not working on equality bodies here? So what is Equinet?
Sure, with pleasure. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to the DO. And Equinet has been present at this conference already with the speakers, Lars' organization, but also Natalie's and Iris's organization is also a member. So we are a network of national equality bodies, which are public bodies working on the promotion of equal treatment and fighting discrimination. And all our members are public bodies which are set up on the basis of EU legislation.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, this panel is, it's called Possibilities from the Perspective of Civil Society. And I mean, you are the co-director of a network of equality bodies. So how important is cooperation with other sectors? Like, for example, us coming from non-governmental organizations or private businesses, other sectors?
Extremely important, of course. This is also one of the many things that Equinet does. So we organize capacity building for our members, but we also, one of the things that we do is we try to make connections with civil society, so between equality bodies and civil society. And I think that equality bodies, by definition, are in a really interesting space because they are in between government and civil society. So they are independent public bodies. So there are some, let's say, special features and special strengths that they can use and put to good use to protect those who are potentially victims of discrimination. Mm. So what we do is also we connect with our sister networks, let's say, networks that are working on different grounds and bringing together European-wide NGOs, NGO networks working on race or ethnic origin or age, disability, sexual orientation, sex, women's rights. So a lot of organizations, we work together with them and try to bring their members and our members on the ground together so that they can communicate and work together at the national level as well.
And how important is civil society to be able to work with different kind of data and to collect information?
I think it's extremely important because, as it was mentioned already several times today, we need multiple sources of equality data if we are to be successful. And I think that one of the really good sources is civil society organizations. They are the ones who always have the trust of the communities. They are the ones who have eyes and ears on the ground, much closer than many equality bodies. Some equality bodies have regional and local offices, but not all of them. So they can channel in complaints and they can also channel in information about where the problems are. And of course, many of them do really great quality work on actually collecting scientific and statistical data as well.
So I hand over now to you, Tamas, so you can lead the next panel.
Thank you. So with that, I would like to just say a few words. Basically, although Hannah has already said that, but the idea with this part of the conference is to talk a little bit with and about the role of civil society organizations and the links between civil society organizations and equality bodies, and also to look at some practical examples of how equality data can be used to ensure equality, actually. And with that, I would like to introduce my panel, which is a great panel. And I would like to invite them one by one on stage. But as opposed to the previous panels, I will invite all four of them on stage at the same time. And then we will start discussions with some rounds of questions that we have to them. So the first one I would like to invite is Mari Cham, who is chairwoman of the National Organization of Afro-Swedes and an expert in racism and equality work with long experience in anti-racism work. Please, Mari, come in. And of course, an applause to her. Then, just following an alphabetical order strictly, the next one is Mia Algren, who is a policy officer for international disability rights at the Swedish Disability Rights Federation, representing the national umbrella for organizations of persons with disabilities. Next up is Majka Grzivnovic, who is a member of the advisory board of ILGA Europe, an independent international non-governmental umbrella organization uniting over 600 organizations from 54 countries across Europe and Central Asia. And in parallel, they also work as the senior advisor on human rights and sustainable development at the Danish Institute for Human Rights. And last but absolutely not least, Nicolas Marugan-Zalba is Deputy Director General for Equal Treatment and Ethnic Diversity at the Spanish Ministry of Equality. So I always miss that you want to applaud them very rightly so, even though they have to justify. And we have this sort of pub setting. I tried to ask the organizers if we can have some booze, but they said that we cannot go to the Systembolaget to get some. So we'll just have to do with water. There are going to be 3 rounds of questions if everything goes well. The first round, I would like the panelists to talk about the rationale of equality data and collecting equality data and the challenges. And my first question, I guess, would be, or first set of questions rather, is it even necessary from your point of view to collect equality data? I guess you wouldn't be here if it was a negative answer, but I would like to hear it from you. Why do you think it is necessary? And do you see any risks? And are there some specific risks that you see on some of the protected grounds of discrimination? I would like to ask Marie, perhaps, to go first.
Hello.
I think it works.
Yes. Thank you for the question. And Afrosvenskarna, which is the National Association for Afro-Swedes, the black population, how we see it is that it is a necessity to have equality data. As a civil society organization, we have the ears on the ground, and we know that our members, they are the group that are most vulnerable for racism and for discrimination in all aspects of the Swedish society. And this is something that Sweden as a nation has ratified through UN, that they are going to combat and eliminate racial inequality, racism, and discrimination. And so far, for 2 decades, we've been talking about we need equality data. And why we need equality data is first and foremost that if we have numbers, if we have statistics on what racism looks like, you know, how it manifests itself, but also how it affects those that are most vulnerable to it, then we can also have it as a tool. Because equality data won't eliminate racism. It won't take away discrimination, but is a tool to combat it. Mm-hmm. And we can see from our own report, we did a study that we sent to the UN about the situation that Afro-Swedes are combating here in Sweden, like how our reality, what it looks like. Because as a Black Swede, we are the most vulnerable group, most affected group in the schools, in the health system, in the workplace, and in the healthcare. So by not having equality data, it's just not combating racism or discrimination. And this point of view is just being sort of a passive point of view.
Yeah, and it's trying to be colorblind, which we also talked about in the break, which doesn't work. So as I understand, it's on one hand, it's a tool to show that such discrimination takes place, and then also to prove, I guess, further down the line.
Definitely. Sweden is a country that are very invested in colorblindness. We don't want to see, we don't want to talk about race or racial inequality. And that is something that we weigh more than those that are affected by it to combat it, which means that at the end of the day, we need to make the majority people, white people in Sweden, comfortable rather than thinking about how our lives are affected. And it has fatal outcomes because we see like for some few years ago, it was a man and he died because of racial acts in the healthcare system. And this is something that is more and more common. And as long as we don't have these concrete numbers that can illustrate what it looks like for minority groups like the Black Swedish population, we're not heading anywhere.
Thank you very much. This is a very powerful call for the importance of equality data, specifically on Afro-Swedes. Mia, I would like to ask you next, what are your views on that and the disability movement's views?
Yeah, thank you very much. So first of all, I'm here today representing the European Disability Forum. We're a member of that, but I work in Sweden, but I'm trying to get the European perspective. So of course, data is necessary to evaluate issues like discrimination. And without it, policymakers can ignore problems or think that they do not exist. Let me take an example from Sweden. We do not have the same protection from hate crimes for persons with disabilities as other groups, so we don't get any data on hate crimes. So does it exist even? So that's one example. So lack of data makes people invisible. And maybe you remember, you've been here all day, we started the day off with Rosemary Case from the CRPD committee, and she was talking about a lot of articles in the convention. Now let's see if you remember them. But what I want to say is that this is the most modern convention, and it actually takes up data and statistics in Article 31. So for every right in the convention, you have to look at data. And there's also another article that I would like to mention that is specific for persons with disabilities, and it's Article 3 about general principles. And persons with disability is not just one group, you know. It's the most diverse part of humanity that you can think of. And in this Article 3, there is a part that says, talks about respect for difference and acceptance of persons with disabilities as part of the human diversity. And this diversity is huge. And that is why it's difficult, like we heard of before, because within this group, there are very small groups within the group, so to speak. So that is a huge challenge, and people really feel invisible because they do not maybe identify with a big group because there's so much difference in between. I would also like to say that the CRPD has worked very closely with the Sustainable Development Goals, and there we have the requirements on disaggregated data. So the UN has made a resource package on indicators for the whole world, combining the CRPD and the SDGs. So talking about fragmentation and trying to look for common tools, this is also a resource that we need to look at. And in the SDGs, we have this, one of the indicators is talking about complaint. And we heard about that this morning, that just counting the complaints doesn't give you all the answers. Because just as we heard from the Fundamental Rights Agency, you need a purpose and you will not report if you feel that nothing is happening when you do a complaint. So these are some of the challenges. And on a European level, we see some progress because of these tools probably as well. But we still see what has been mentioned before, that many countries do not wish to include disability, and there are different aspects of that. But we needed to do the comparisons. We needed to see what change is happening. How does we have to see outcomes. If somebody makes a change or puts in a law or a policy, we need this data to see what is happening, and also comparing between countries in Europe, because sometimes the country that you thought were the best were actually the worst, and vice versa in different aspects. So also mentioned before is privacy. Of course, if you combine data like geography and a very special kind of disability or impairment, you're very easily identified. So there are methods to go around that, but you have to be very careful. And we do have a lot of lack of data, of quality data. Also because there are these small groups, as I was saying. And finally, I come back to that, and I would just like to say that we have a huge challenge, which we heard from Fundamental Rights Agency as well, with artificial intelligence and machine learning, where data from small groups is taken away, and we fear a big risk of exclusion in many areas. So.
That's a lot. That's a lot of really good food for thought. Thank you very much, also to you, Mia. And maybe I'll just pick on the importance of segmentation and how subgroups of persons with disabilities can also feel invisible if you are just looking at a big group of persons with disabilities. Also, of course, all the different challenges you mentioned, and artificial intelligence has been mentioned a little bit, but not too much today until now. So that's also, thank you very much for that. Micah, I'm turning to you now.
Yes.
What are your experiences and views on this?
Thank you. You ask very tiny questions, I must say. And just before I start, I'm really happy, Mia, that you mentioned SDGs and the data. You know, the 2030 Agenda was supposed to create data revolution. I don't think we are there yet. So I think we have some work to do in the revolution part. So I think today we established that the world is driven by data. We wouldn't be here and discussing the whole day and working tirelessly on data if it wasn't the case. And we also said that you cannot really create meaningful and targeted policies and programs without data, and then monitoring what's going on without data. And not only that, we need good data. Where do we find good data? What does this mean? And who decides what good data is, right? So we said it needs to be disaggregated. How do we disaggregate it? Who decides what the identities in the disaggregation or grounds of discriminations are? And sometimes, we ask, why do we need equality data? Sometimes we need data to prove that we exist in societies, because in some places, we say that this group doesn't exist, this is not a problem, we move on. So just for the pure proof of the existence is important. I would say also that, and that was also said, it's a privilege to be at the end of the day because we can refer to a lot of information already. The key for people who are marginalized usually or exposed to violence and discrimination is the data protection. We mentioned that. How do we do this? And to be counted in a correct way. We don't want boxes because boxes never work, but we need to find language to define us because we work in language. There is no other good way to do this. And then going back to the segregation and what we are able to actually do and decipher nowadays. A lot of data is collected based on one identity that we have. We are not one identity. We are so complex, and that's why, you know, the intersectional data and intersectional analysis of that data is so complicated and complex. It's not easy to do. And now to challenges and risks connected with LGBTI data collection or handling. You know, across the EU, we see rising trends of homophobic, transphobic violence, hate speech. This is not a surprise to anybody, so I'm just kind of creating the context. And that means that it's a serious decision for someone to come out and share data or tell about oneself, right? To then do the research, change the policy, and prove that there are problems on structural level or as an individual. That shouldn't be the case. We need people to feel safe and trust the system, either if it's an organization or civil society collecting data or a state. We should be able to trust and not be worried about being exposed to violence afterwards. And now really a couple of challenges, because it was mentioned slightly. And going back to the intersectional data and challenges around that, the more grounds are covered and the more intersectional data we gather, the harder it is to get meaningful data samples that are statistically viable. We were talking about it just before. You know, how many people is enough people to take it seriously? And, you know, I could argue that even small group of people facing serious violations is a problem and we should address it, but maybe for another conversation. And then, obviously, because of that, there needs to be space for providing space to give stories. We need to be able to tell our lives stories, the qualitative data, if we will. And then the last point I wanted to make, going back to the small groups of data, or small groups. This is also one of the risks, that it's easy to manipulate. If it's a small group of people that the data is collected on, and they say, we don't experience violations, does that mean that the violations are not happening for this group? So there's a lot of challenges, because of course we want to believe that and take it seriously, but it's not the whole picture, because first of all, why the group was so small? Maybe we didn't reach them. You know, we didn't go an extra mile to get to the community. I think I will leave it for now.
Very good. Yes, I think that you are raising also great and very important issues about the world that is driven by data, but is it always good data and good quality data, and is it used for the good purposes? Also, that's an issue. And I also take your point about really small groups and small samples still being very important, but difficult to handle with the tools of statistics and social sciences. And of course, the smaller the group, also the bigger the risk of being able to identify the persons. So there is a really interesting tension there as well, I think. Nicholas, your turn with a slightly different perspective from the Minister of Equality.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation for the Swedish Ombudsman, and thank you for having this debate, because I believe it is really important, and that in Europe we should have this debate, because of course there is a need, from our point of view, there is a really need for good data, as you were saying. And also there is a need to define some things that I don't think that are completely clear. For example, I think we don't have strictly clear what are we talking about when we talk about structural discrimination. When we talk about structural racism, we need to have clear these things. I think it is basics in this debate that we have a very participated debate and a slow debate. In Spain, we started a debate 3 years ago. We started with a National Statistics Office, and the first thing we realized is that we were living in a lie. We were living in a myth. Most of the people, even the experts in Spain, thought because of data protection legislation, we couldn't collect data. And we go to the National Statistics Office and says, is this real? Can we collect data? And the National Statistics Office says, yes, of course we can collect data. Has anybody come to ask you this? No, nobody has come to ask you this. And, well, let's start work with National Statistics Office, with the Data Protection Agency, with the Council for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, who President Antumito CJ is here, with a lot of organizations of civil society. We have met with more than 50 civil society organizations, with the National Roma Council, Spanish National Roma Council. We have met with a lot of people, and of course with the big support of the Fundamental Rights Agency that has gone with us during all the process. And in this process, the first thing we have done is to learn, because we realized we didn't know a lot of things. And first, people told us, and we realized that we had to have a clear objective. If we don't have a clear objective, there were going to be a lot of risks. And now I think we have not only a clear objective, but a almost consensus objective. And this is to evaluate structural racism. But first we want to define what is structural racism. And I think not only Spain, but the whole Europe, we should look in our history and how our history of colonization, a history of slavery, has affected the racism that we live today. And I think I thank the European Commission with the European Union Anti-Racism Action Plan, because they give a lot of keys there in order for us to understand what structural racism. And I think we not only have to have a clear objective, but phases. For example, we think, well, first we have to define what's structural racism and to look in our history. But then we need to evaluate, to assess structural racism. And how do we do that? And for that, I think if we don't have data, and as you said, we need good data, because there's a lot of fake news right now. And I think a way of combat fake news that we're having all days, for me, the best way to combat fake news is with good data. If you don't have good data, you're going to be manipulated by fake news. But I think we need to talk more about is after we assess, after we have that data, what are we going to do? And in our regulation, we don't talk a lot about positive action. I mean, we all know structural racism exists. Even if we don't have that data, people expert that we have been working in this for a year, we know structural racism is there, and not only racism, structural discrimination in all the grounds we're talking about. So after assessing, we need to talk more about what kind of positive actions in education, in housing, in healthcare are we going to take. We need to build like all these phases. And for us, starting also with risks, is we had several risks and we had several challenges during the process. Well, first of all, we had to realize, and in the document Rosalina was saying before about the guidelines of the European Commission, said that you have to do a document, which Spain did, about the data collection work we're already collecting. I mean, Spain has been collecting data for a long time. But at the same time, we were saying we couldn't collect ethnic data because it was illegal. So it was a bit strange. For example, we have Javier here from the Fundación Secretariado Gitano, the biggest Roma organization, that have been doing a lot of studies on housing, on employment, on discrimination for years. And people relied on those studies. Or other Roma organizations like Camira or Facali or other Roma that were doing studies on racial segregation for Roma people. Or on the Council for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, we have done a study on the perception of discrimination on the basis of racial ethnic origin in the year 2011, 2013, 2020, and now we're doing one with more money and with more surveys. But now what we're trying to do with the National Statistics Office, and we're trying to get consensus on not only collect data, but to have a concrete proposal. And it's to do a big survey, but maybe I'll tell you later. I'd only announce about 500,000 people survey in the year 2026 on, for the first time, doing a data origin, an ethnic data origin question, where we're almost there with the consensus with civil society on what are the names they want to be used, what are the most used names, how they want to categorize themselves, how to do it. But we're trying, and another thing we were really learned during the process is about the timing. And we started with a little bit of hurry, and after 1 year we said, listen, we need to tell everybody there's no hurry on this. Because there's so many ways of seeing it, there's so many things, and there's risks there, and we know there's risks there, that first we want to reach consensus with no hurry. We had, for example, it was said here by the German representative of the equality body, in Spain, and it's historically completely legitimate, the Roma people were some of them very reluctant to this. So we said, listen, we have no hurry. We want to reach consensus with you. We want you to be clear. And first of all, we were clear with them that we were not talking at all about the census. In the way census is done in Spain, it's ridiculous to talk about this word because it's just a survey. Of course, it's with all the principles you just said, voluntarily, anonymity, self-identification. I mean, all the doing no harm. We understand, and we had a lot of meetings with them, with civil society, and with the Data Protection Agency, with the National Statistics Office, with the Fundamental Rights Agency, and we had that process, lots of meetings. We have done 3 anti-racist weeks where we invited everybody, national, international organizations. And for Spain, because of our history, it was important to invite other countries. We have other countries, not only in Europe, in America, in Latin America, and also the United States or the UK, who have been doing this for years. So we asked them to come, said, what are your results? What are your impacts? What has worked? What hasn't worked? Because we need to learn. If we're going to do this, countries like Brazil, like Colombia, like Mexico have been doing this for years, and we wanted to learn them, so we invited them in this process. And I think I'll stop.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. It's been very rich as well, talking about the importance of cooperation with civil society. Also, you started with overcoming this myth, which I think was also mentioned in the previous session about whether or not collection of equality data is even possible and legal. And I think this is key because we have been hearing that way too much and way too often. And I think that, to me, you coming from a ministry and telling all this story also tells me that there is another very important element, which is political will to do this and to collect data and to accept the fact that there is structural discrimination, or at least let's see if there is structural discrimination, and for that you need data. Now, you also talked about not being in a hurry. We are not quite in a hurry, but I will have to ask you to respect the time, because otherwise I will be very severely punished by Hannah. But moving on to the second round of questions, and I will start again with Marie, which is about the use of equality data. So how do we use the equality data when we have it? What's the best use of it? What are the possible uses of it? And do you have any good practical examples? You also said that you yourself also created some equality data, collected some equality data from the community. So how are you using that?
We try to use it in a way so that it could be monitored. We try to use it in a way so that we can have different categories to work with. But I think what Nicholas said before, just before me, I think is something very, very important and very essential. Because if we don't have a political will to address the issue of race and discrimination, as we do for gender equality, then we can't combat it in a constructive way, you know? And the thing is that the challenges is mostly that we don't want to approach it in a way that is certain, because he was telling us about, they have this legislative things, you know, and the myths of thinking about that it's not possible to do it. We kind of did it, but still the possibility is there. And we heard in the last section, for instance, that they are collecting some data, and this data can be broken down in bits and pieces, anonymized and self-identified, and it can be sent out to the authorities that need to work with the data to imply positive actions. And another thing about that is that we are a member state in the EU, and we see that in the EU there are more member states that follow, for example, the Irish woman that was here today, and she was talking from FRA, and she was talking about they are collecting data for the Roman people, for the visual minorities, the Jewish communities, the Black people. But here in Sweden, most of the time we hear that, no, we can't collect data for all these groups because Some of them doesn't want to collect the data and so on. But we are also a EU country, member state, just as the other, just like Ireland. But they can do it and they apply it. But this is like the most severe challenge that we have here, that it is impossible. It's impossible to collect the data. And it can cost whatever it will cost, but we won't collect it as we should. And like in Sweden, we have this conception of that equality data is something new. But it isn't. We have equality data when it comes to monitoring gender discrimination. We don't want them to, we don't want them to invent the wheel. The wheel is good. It's functioning. We need to add to the wheel. Yeah?
Yeah.
Because a question to all of you here. Do you see that I'm black? Huh? Okay. So the people see that I'm a visual minority. That proves that I'm always a target. But by not monitoring it and telling me that it's for my own good, and we can't visualize that, but everybody in the audience saw that I'm black. So how do we then implement and monitor equality data based on race? Because we need to talk about race. We have a lot of knowledge, scientific evidence of that Swedish is a very racist country.
Yeah, thank you very much for this wake-up call and again calling the attention to the importance of collecting the data and not hiding behind the fact that it's for your own good and protecting yourself from yourself, basically. Yeah, indeed. Mia.
Okay, so the European Disability Forum uses data for awareness raising and advocacy. We need comparable data from countries over time, as I said again, because I think it's important to stress that it's not just an ad hoc report here and there. You have to see change. And for example, we publish every year a human rights report on a different theme. So we've done poverty and how comparing poverty in the European Union and how can we use that in turn on a national level. Well, we used it in our national report in Sweden, for example, showing the big change, a huge change that we can see, that we get when we compare data between countries, then we see patterns that we wouldn't have seen otherwise. We've done a report on right to vote. I don't know if you know that there are a lot of countries in Europe where everybody has still not the right to vote. I mean, these are things that we have to highlight, and they are hidden because we just don't think about them on a daily basis. This year, recently, we published an important human rights report on employment. And employment, I have to check my numbers here, 51.3% persons with disabilities are employed compared to 75.6% without disabilities in Europe. And then there's a lot of difference between the countries that we need to highlight. Also, again, looking at time. And I would like to come back to artificial intelligence here, because here we have a huge challenge. We can see it in the US, and it's coming to Europe as well. Companies using artificial intelligence to recruit people. And here there is a huge risk for exclusion of persons with disabilities, not even knowing that it's there, that you've been discriminated because of how the algorithms work. Then we have intersectional discrimination. Once again, I want to sell my beautiful convention, the CRPD, the most modern, you remember? It's also very highlighting intersectionality. And talking about what you said, human rights model of disability. Disability is just one layer of your identity. So we look at, for example, on this employment report, we look at the gender equality index and see the difference between men and women. Only 20% of women with disabilities have full-time work compared to 29% of men in Europe. And Fundamental Rights Agency will look at your reports on social exclusion for Roma with disabilities. 29% between 20 and 64 years old declared paid work as their main activity. So there are huge differences on an intersectional level, and data can make a difference here, and we cannot ignore these intersectional layers, and we try to work with them very much.
Thank you very much, Mia. Indeed, I think that, thank you for pointing out your reports, your annual reports, the CDF. That's some equality body input is also there, I think.
May I add just one more thing that you said about quality? I think we are also trying to take examples like storytelling. Mm-hmm. So we are adding the numbers with stories where people mm-hmm. try to visualize and tell, this is what's happening to me, to make it more communicated.
Not just numbers, but actual individual stories, which is very important for awareness raising and advocacy. Thank you very much. Micah.
Yes, I think we also agreed that we need to do something with the data, because the data in itself, it's just there. Mm-hmm. So one of the key demands of LGBTI and other human rights groups has been disaggregated data that looks deeper into experiences and mm-hmm. Lived experiences. And with this in mind, ILGA Europe, together with partners, over the last year started to do analysis of the latest, the 2019 FRA LGBTI survey, to look exactly in intersectional discrimination or experiences of people experiencing intersectional marginalization. And I was very happy that Rosalina already gave kind of the introduction and the context what FRA is doing, so I don't have to go into many details. I will just say that that 2019 survey was the biggest so far. It was 140,000 of participants. So we had really, really overarching participation. And it is supposed to assist the EU member states in strengthening and furthering legal and policy frameworks protecting LGBTI people. So what we did at ILGA Europe with partners is to look at 9 groups and analyze a bit deeper their experience. And we decided to go a bit deeper into looking at experiences of lesbians, young people, older people, people with disabilities, intersex people, bisexual people, trans people, people from ethnic minorities, including migrants, and also socioeconomically excluded LGBTI people. And so far, there are 4 briefs on the website. So if you Google, I don't have a link in a very accessible way, but if you Google ILGA Europe intersectionality, the briefs will come up for you. And we have one on youth, lesbians, older people, and intersex people. And why it's important is that those briefs look at multiple intersecting discriminations of people that usually fall into between cracks. Mm-hmm. I refer to, like, we are not only one identity. And on the way here, I actually revisited the brief on older people. And it actually looks at, an older person who is of ethnic minority and has disability, and what numbers there are. And the discrimination is just staggering. So just for that, if you are interested, I would really recommend looking into those experiences that we otherwise don't know about. And I think it goes back to, we keep on hearing that we need to implement intersectional policies or data or analysis. How do we do this? I don't think we found the magic bullet how to do it. And so we need to keep on talking, but then we need to test it. So this project with the briefs is one way of showing and imagining what is happening. First of all, not imagining what's happening, it's a fact, but imagining what should be addressed and possibly how, together with those affected. And then I think we need to start appreciating the small numbers. We look at big numbers, big facts of what's going on. I think we need to zoom into that.
Thank you so much.
That's all for now.
Thank you so much, and I think it's also very interesting how ILGA Europe is starting to do that work that you mentioned, that it's important to further segment and look at smaller groups as well. So you do it yourself to some extent with these briefs. Thank you. Nicholas.
Yes, well, we were talking how to use equality data and our experiences. I think in Spain we have improved in collecting data on hate crimes. We have specialized prosecutors, we have a special unit in the Ministry of Interior, and we have done better on that. So there's still a lot of underreporting, and there's still a lot to do. The next step, I think we're improving. Last year was approved the equality data law. The equality law. The law in July was approved, and a new equality independent body is supposed to be organized. Is supposed to be created soon. But also, what was new about that law, and what was new, but what we're already doing, is not only talking about hate crimes, but also talking about administrative sanctions, and talking in different aspects. And in that sense, the Council for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination has tripled its budget, and has increased the number of offices it has in all Spain. It has increased the timetable of the telephone. Now we have a 3-digit telephone. It's called 021, which has already started to work. And in that way, we have passed from 1,500 people reporting a year to more than almost 1,600 on 2022. And we believe we are combating underreporting, and more people are knowing the service and are reporting. And we have many more reportings in housing, in healthcare, in education. So we're getting there. And in these two areas, I think we are improving. Still, we need a lot to go on, a lot of work to do, especially to combat underreporting. But what I was talking before, and in the dialogue, the debate we started with the National Statistics Office, with data protection, I think we need another kind of data. And Rosalina also was talking before about inequalities and about, in countries like when I hear, for example, in COVID, when I hear that in the UK they know how many black people had COVID and how many Roma people had COVID. We don't have that data in Spain. When I hear in Brazil that the first time they did the census, only about 30% of themselves recognized as people of African descent. But when they saw that the policies that were done by the government on housing, on healthcare, and leverage from poor people to middle class were working, because that had an ethnic origin, a racial axis. So many people believed in that policies, and in the next census, it passed from 30% to more than 50% that in Brazil out to recognize, self-identified themselves as people of African descent. We need this kind of data, and we need to make, as it was said before, trust in the different organizations. And for that, without civil society, forget it. We're not going to be there. So we need to work with the civil society and make trust, mainly we need to do some communication strategy and some awareness-raising campaigns like they did in Latin America, where we're working on them, for people to realize that if we need the data of how many Roma go to the university, how many Roma are under housing, how many Arab people don't have are exploited in their work. We need to have more information in that kind of data in order, as I was saying before, to realize and assess what kind of structural racism we have, and then to see the root causes, the causes of that. That's my belief. That's the way we should be working on.
Thank you very much. I think it was a very powerful way also to show how equality data can lead to legislative changes and practical policy changes. Now, can I just ask the panelists half a minute each on the links between equality bodies and civil society organizations when it comes to equality data. What do you see as the role for cooperation between your organizations, for instance, and equality bodies? Maybe I'll start now with you, Nicholas, because you, of course, also have very strong links with the Council. So half a minute each, please.
Okay. Well, all the work I've said, it would be impossible without civil society. I think Spain relies a lot on the work we do on the civil society. For example, the Service for the Assistance of Racist Incidents, of victims of racial discrimination. The Council, now the new law is going to be more independent, the new body that will be created. But the body that we have now and the service we have now is run by NGOs. All the different physical office and the 021 and call is all run by NGOs. And I think they're doing a great job and they're doing really well. So in that way, we couldn't do it without civil society. All the debate we had, we had to ask and we had to rely on Arab civil society, on Muslim civil society, on Roma civil society, on people of African descent civil society, and on civil society that works on human rights. In Spain, we have a national council, a national Roma council that is formed by 20 civil society Roma organizations and 20 representatives of ministries, and it meets a lot. It's really, really very active. So, and Roma people are very active. But we have done a draft law, and we hope it will get to Parliament soon, a law against racism, racial discrimination, and related forms of intolerance. And one of the means of that law is to create and to perfectionate and to create more bodies where civil society and the public bodies will be more powerful. So in Spain, we have a really good experience with civil society.
Thank you. Micah.
Elevators pitch. All of us are representing or working with populations that have been historically excluded and discriminated. So the trust with authorities doesn't come in a natural way, right? There needs to be work done, a lot of homework. And civil society organizations are a really good link between, communities and authorities or equality bodies. So I think there is a lot of work to be done and partnerships need to be established.
Thank you
so I
much.
think that's the biggest.
Very good.
Okay. Yeah, we need data collection widely, and civil society organizations are often useful when it's difficult to reach data. For example, violence against women, people with intellectual disabilities, women with autism are really hard to reach. But now I'm going to say something. We see a shrinking space in many, many countries. We need resources, and we need the equality bodies to use the data that has been very carefully collected as well. So, I think there's a lot to be done, but also the resources. Please, we need more space.
Absolutely. I think we can mutually strengthen each other. Marie?
Yes. Obviously, for the Black population in Sweden, we see it necessary to work with authorities so that we don't reproduce racism, but at the same time we can get adequate measurement tools, And what we see is that Sweden is an extreme country because we don't follow the laws and the rules and the regulation of EU and UN, because that's why we wrote our report, so that we can tell how it is in the society for the Black population. Because when we want to address race, we need to do it together somehow, because otherwise we can't achieve what is the main goal. And we had in the session before us, we had this Bollingholms model that we really don't stand by in any way. We don't think that this is a way to go, because Sweden is that extreme that they haven't followed what the UN had given them as a critique, that they need to collect equality data based on race. And this is something that has not been done. And now to save Sweden by implementing Bollingholm's model or whatever, I think if we're going to look at that as an efficient model, then maybe we should apply it on gender first and see which patterns women can be vulnerable to in our society before we test it on other groups. Or let us just all work with equality data for everybody. Just add it in this wheel.
Thank you so much. Let's all work on equality data. I think that's clear. Thank you so much. I think an applause is in order for the panel. And maybe some questions.
Yes. You've been getting questions, so I hope I can ask you those. One question that has been posed is that equality data often say things about the access for different groups, but it doesn't say anything about the shortcomings of those in charge that needs to be addressed. So how should we use this for the people who are in charge? I think it's a question like, so if you have the data, how can you use this and to push the people in charge? I think that's the question. Do you have any ideas? How could you use the data to push the politics?
You can start.
Well, I think we have this ad hoc thing that we do one report. Now we've done the report, this is it. We have to have the outcomes. We need to put them together with targets and then follow it up. So it cannot just be, we see it all the time in reporting to the UN. Well, we did this report, fine, but nothing happened. So we need to put it together with targets and follow-ups.
I think politicians are really pressured with data. I mean, the more data and the more good data that you have, the more pressure that you're put on politicians. And you have, I think you need all the data to be public. That is important because not all the data is public, and all good data should be public. But once the data, I mean, you put in examples with people of disability between the employment gap. I mean, that's if that's not a pressure for politicians, I mean, without that data, the pressure will be half. I think will be much lower.
And also, I mean, we talk about, data is showing human rights violations or lack of access to something. This is also connected with human rights obligations. Our country signed, conventions that says specifically what we should have. So if the data says that a group doesn't have access to education or, the same opportunities, that needs to be corrected. So I think it's also for us to create advocacy strategies to address specific and ask for specific things. Sometimes we are not specific enough, I think, sometimes. So I think we need to be strategic and concrete and push visibility, all of this.
Towards certain rights as well and show it very clearly, yeah. Marie?
Yeah, we have anti-racist act plan that we don't really follow from 2020 to 2025. And I think that to work with equality data right now, it's of necessity because of EU has said that 2025 we should have equality data. And how to use this equality data, we need to see who is being targeted, who is most vulnerable, where it occurs, and then when we have the picture, we have illustration, then we can emphasize on what to do. As I said earlier, it's just a tool. It's not going to eliminate racism. It's not going to vanish discrimination. But now we can know what the elephant in the room looks like.
And the next question is actually about that, using it as a tool. Considering the structural racism persistent even in countries with a long tradition of collecting racial data like the US, how can the European nations do better in their anti-racist strategies derived from that data? So what kind of action should you take? And here is an example. It says affirmative actions. But so what would you do with this data to take the next step is the question, I think. Do you want to start and then we can?
I think positive action, we need to talk more about affirmative action or positive action, whatever you want to say. I mean, people who work on this, I think we need more data to explain it better and to have a better picture and a better diagnosis. But we all know there's a lot of structural racism. So we know once we have the data and we can prove there's a lot of structural racism, the next step, I mean, if there's no teachers, if there's no black teachers or Roma teachers, we need to put in place Roma teachers or black teachers or diversity police, or we need to do measures in order for Roma people to get better access to university. I mean, we need to do those things, to do positive action, as our legislation says.
Any more thoughts on that question? Or?
I could just emphasize on what Nicholas said, because what we can see at the labor market, where black people are most vulnerable to discrimination, like we have this thought of that organizations that are entirely white doesn't have any problem with racism or discrimination. But the fact is that they are the most racist or discriminating organizations. Because they don't have the representation in place, and not only the representation in place, but if you don't visualize in your workplace the people that you're going to serve or give service to, how can you ensure that you're giving them the right service?
And I have
one thing I'm thinking. I think that usually we are friends here. We are talking about these things. We have to get them out into other parts of society and maybe get other people to get engaged in these things so they are shown, especially in a time like we're living in now when we are questioning that these things even exist. So maybe we have to think about a few new things to get out it to other people.
And so also getting out to other people, that's an interesting question. So I have the last question here, but I think it's a bit connected. Given history of minority categorization being used to do harm, how are you approaching the subject to make equality data socially acceptable and mainstream in all marginalized groups? So in the sense like, because we have different... Of course, we have, as all of you have mentioned, there are different responses to this. So what type of lobbying and market plan is necessary is the question.
I mean, nobody questions when we give our data to the healthcare system or to the education, the data of our children, which is really protected data. When we give it to the educational system, nobody's questioning that the educational system is going to use it wrong. We believe in it. Which is the same with this. We need this kind of data because we're going to use it, but it has to be the objective and the purpose to fight racial discrimination, to assess structural discrimination. It has to be a compromise in order to get this data.
When we talk about racial inequality, this question is a question that always pops up. And we tend to not reflect on all the other data that is out there. Big data that people can use to harm or do other crazy stuff. First and foremost, we have our tax office here in Sweden, because we are a country that we love to take in all kind of knowledge. And anybody can today, if you just want to do harm, you can call the tax office and you can ask about all of these official details, where somebody lives, where somebody come from, where their parents are from, because we use proxy most of the time. So all this data is out there. But when we talk about getting equality data and putting in affirmative measures, then we end up in a discussion where it's about stigmatizing us.
Yeah. Okay. I think, Thomas, it's your panel, so perhaps if you want to say thank you, or should I? Should we say it? Thank you?
Yes, Nicholas is dying to...
He's dying to say, okay, something else. You have,
I just want to announce,
half a minute.
sorry, that in July we start the Spanish presidency, and I just want to tell you that we're going to follow with this topic in a conference in Barcelona, the 2nd and 3rd of November. It's going to be called Anti-Racism in the European Union, and then it's going to have quite a big focus on people of African descent, on the recognition, justice and development, as the Decade of People of African Descent says. And I hope you can all come to Barcelona on November. Thank you.
Okay, so that was...
On that note, I just want to highlight that we have our report that we dropped the 21st of March, and it's on our website, afrosvenskarna.se, so that you can just, you know, educate yourself about how the living standards for Afro-Swedes look.
Is it in English as well, or in Swedish?
No, it's in Swedish,
It is
but
Swedish,
you can just, you know, translate it or something. Get a friend.
Okay.
Get a Swedish friend.
Get a Swedish friend.
So,
Okay.
tack så mycket, dziękuję bardzo, muchas gracias.
Tack,
Thank you
Thomas.
very much to the panel. I think they did an excellent job.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Oh, I already get it. Oh.
You got a present. Thomas, what are your key takeaways from this panel?
I think for me, the key takeaway from the whole conference is that equality data is necessary. So we have to collect it. We have to overcome the myth that this, for some reason, is not allowed under EU law or under national laws, and that it is something that's necessary to fight discrimination. So simply, I think that's my most important takeaway, which of course is not very revolutionary.
So did something surprise you during the day?
Thank you for asking, because that might be somewhat more original. I think what surprised me perhaps is that we talked a lot about why we should collect equality data, and then we talked a lot about how we should collect equality data. And I think it's only around the sort of finishing the final straight of the conference that we got to how should we use it? Like, what should we use it for? Why? What do we do with equality data? And I think it's really crucial, because then if we are clear about that, then it's also much easier to explain to the communities why you are trying to collect their data. So I think we have to be clear in our minds about why we are collecting and how we are collecting, but also how we are going to use the data when we have it. And of course, we need good practices, and we need sharing of good practices. For instance, Equinet is very happy to provide a platform for that. And we have a working group on research and data collection. We are very happy to provide a platform. It's important to discuss how best to use the equality data that we have.
So are you traveling back today or tomorrow?
Actually, Monday morning.
Monday morning, are you staying? Okay, that's fine.
I heard it's going to be sunny. So.
It's going to be sunny. So, okay, on Monday morning, on Tuesday, when you go to your office, what will you take back with you when it comes to the work with equality data? Is it something you heard here today that you're going to bring with you, or perhaps a new connection? Or
well, I think that a lot of good connections, a lot of good new connections. So thank you very much to all the speakers. And I think, you know, there are some who we are already connecting with and working together with. But there are also some new partners in this field. And I think that it's important to have clarity. I think that's what I take home. It's important to have clarity about how we want to use it, as I mentioned, the equality data, but also to be clear about what we mean when we say equality data, because I think we heard many different definitions, and I think it's important that we talk about the same thing.
And how we're going to use it as well.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Thomas.
Thank you very much.
We've had a long and interesting day, and I hope it has brought new thoughts and perspectives. We have soon reached the closing of the day, but first I would like to invite Ms. Tena Simonovic Alvater, there you are, up to the stage for some closing remarks. And I just want to introduce Tena. She's the chair of Equinet, and we already heard about Equinet a bit from Thomas, so I'm going to hand over to you so I won't see more of your time.
Well, thank you so much. First, I want to say thank you to the Swedish Ombudsman as well as the Swedish Presidency for organizing a conference which has been, I would say, very interesting, for not having us listen to the pre-prepared speeches and everybody agreeing, but actually really looking into some issues that we should discuss further. And yes, Hannah opened with saying, we've been discussing this for a long time. Indeed, we have been discussing equality data for a very long time, over 2 decades in Europe, and still there's no agreement on important things, and still we're not improving and moving forward as much as we should. And I would say the big takeaway from me here is that we need to discuss more and further. There are more questions that we should dig deeper into. And yes, while we need to speak to those who do not think like us, I think first we need to speak more and more honestly and more openly with arguments amongst the like-minded and agree on things and then move forward. Now, yes, I will speak today as the chair of Equinet, as you heard from Tamas, a network of 47 institutions, but I'm also the head of a national institution, a national equality body, or an institution of 5 mandates. And I think it's important to also note that we need European-level discussions, but we also need national-level discussions. We need both, and that's quite clear from today. I think we need to critically question everything, openly exchange views, but then also look for constructive ways forward. Now, my first question that was here present today was, well, let's look for something constructive that we can build consensus around. Is equality data a tool for combating discrimination? And here the answer is yes, clearly yes. Nobody was saying it's not, and that's a good starting point. We all agree why, and we agree how, and maybe we should discuss that a bit more, as Tamas just said. How is it exactly a tool? It's a tool for looking at structural discrimination issues. It's a tool in cases, not only in front of equality bodies, but also in court cases, which we haven't been mentioning that much today. It's a tool for advocating for legislative changes, to show that there are discriminatory laws and discriminatory practices, but also when new legislation is being proposed, to think about using the existing data and saying this will produce discriminatory effect. Look at the data which we have, but for that we need the data first. It's important for the strategies mentioned, the EU strategies, but national strategies as well, in design, in the implementation, and in the evaluation to see whether we're getting it right. We need the data. Now, a big question for everybody working in an equality body that comes from every journalist every time is, so how much discrimination is there in your country? To answer that question, you need data, and you need different types of data. You cannot only rely on court data because there are so few cases in which discrimination is being established. You cannot only rely on the cases coming from the equality bodies because, again, there's more cases than court cases, but still not enough cases. Why? Because many people do not report discrimination. And only if we do research and surveys, only if we ask questions about perception and experiences, we actually get to the level of underreporting we have on discrimination. Now, we have been doing that sort of research, and that's something that I would say that has been very useful in Croatia. As an equality body, since 2009, we periodically do, using the same methodology, a research not only looking at perception and self-perception and experiences, and if somebody says that they have experienced discrimination, we also ask, have you reported, and to whom, and if not, why not? Those why not answers are very important. But also we measure stereotypes and prejudices. This is something that hasn't been discussed because before there is discrimination, there are stereotypes, and we should speak about that as well. But there is something that was clear to me today as well. In order to move forward, speaking about equality data, we need to be more clear about which aspect, which part of equality data we're actually talking about. On one hand, we have the census data and the duty bearers equality data which they collect or should be collecting. So whether we're speaking about public institutions or we're speaking about employers, both public and private, that's the data that they should be collecting. On the other hand, we also have complaints data, both from equality bodies and the courts. And finally, we have surveys on perceptions and experiences. All of that is very important. And when I say surveys, I think we need to also distinguish between general population surveys and specific surveys where questions are asked to the members of the group. For instance, we can see great differences in the Eurobarometer results and the EU Midas results done by FRA, where the group itself sees something different than the general public is seeing, and for good reason. Now, who collects data is also a question, and that relates to which data we're talking about. And certain issues, problems, challenges that we were talking today also depend on the specific subcategory of the data we're discussing. If we're speaking about cases, then it's quite clear you, as somebody who has experienced discrimination, will say on which ground, and that will come forward in the complaints handling and in the court case. With some other types of data, that will not be an issue as much. Now, looking at the role of equality bodies, what do we do and what we should be doing and what we can potentially be doing better? We definitely collect data on our own work, which is complaints data, but that's not enough. As I already mentioned, we should be doing research as well. We should also look at research done by researchers in academic institutions as well as civil society. And various sources should also exchange their results. Now, as Equinet, we have been working since a long time, but particularly in the past couple of years, on data collection, both within the working group, which Tamas mentioned, as well as further. In the proposals, which were mentioned a couple of times today, there are two current proposals for two directives and standards for equality bodies. There are two important parts that relate to what we were discussing today, which I want to highlight. One is that we need the member states to agree, and we need the support of the European Parliament to agree on strong provisions on data collection for equality bodies. Another important element is the provision on every equality body in the future having to do the sort of reporting that the Swedish Ombudsman has done, and I congratulate you for that. So doing a report on the state of discrimination using the data, coming from an institution which has been doing that sort of reporting annually for the past 14 years, I can tell you it's definitely not easy. And one of the biggest challenges for us is the data collection, because it takes us such a long time, because we report in our own cases, on the court cases, and not only on the statistics, but we analyze them. We take data from the public bodies, the ministries, the institutions, on the census when it's new, from civil society, from trade unions, churches and religious communities. And then we recommend. One of the recommendations in our last annual report for 2022 is a recommendation on data collection. Why? Because we see that public institutions are not collecting the equality data they should be collecting. Some institutions out there say we don't collect the data because of the GDPR. Some institutions out there say we don't collect the data because we treat everybody equally. We treat everybody who is insured in terms of medical insurance equally, so we don't need to ask them specific questions. That, of course, is not true. So we've had this discussion with the health insurance institution as well. So yes, I think if those proposals are adopted, that will be a clear way forward also when it comes to the equality data. The problems mentioned today and the challenges, there were quite a few, from fears about collection and the use based on the well-known historical abuse, but also certain bodies and countries actually not collecting data. As a member of ECRI, the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance, I can tell you that the biggest difficulty that you have as a monitoring body is when a country says, well, we have no data on that, but everything is fine. If you have no data, that's a problem in itself. But then you need to collect the data, and then we'll see where the real problem is. The differences in the data, this hasn't really been mentioned so much today. There are sometimes differences in the officially collected data collected by the state and by civil society. That's something we should look into as well. Intersectionality brings forward additional challenges, I would say. And the last panel just asked the question, are we doing it right? We're not doing it right yet. And data collection is only one part of it. Self-identification has been mentioned many times, a very important issue. And yes, we should be aware that identities are not fixed, and they change in time, and they change depending on context, and you don't have only one. So going back to intersectionality, but we should be collecting the data. positive action in relation to self-identification and data collection, quite important as well. Comparability. If we want European-level comparability, we need same categories. We cannot agree on the categories nationally, let alone at the European level. That's an issue. Grounds. So we know we have different anti-discrimination laws across the EU. If you use the grounds in different national legislation, that already will be an issue. In some countries there's 6, there's the EU 6. In some countries there's over 20. Some of them overlap. And finally, some grounds are more challenging than others. But I can tell you that there are very few grounds that don't need to be debated and discussed. So far, the only one that I think I didn't hear should be really debated and is a biological fact, is age, but only related to the fact when you were born and how old you are. Whether you're young or old is a question up for debate. So, more discussion for sure. And then we've collected the data, and then what? The interpretation of data. It can be misused, and it can be simplified. Simplifications can be a problem as well in this time when nobody really wants to read a very long report done by a data scientist. We want it very short and sexy so it can be a headline. Well, that can really amount to a misrepresentation of the data collected. And somebody can also misuse the data much, much more seriously as well. And then finally, from the use of data and interpretation of data, from the collection of the data, what we really need to get to is change on the ground. And there's such a long way from the collection of data to the change on the ground using the data. So to me, the big takeaway is we need to discuss more. We as Equinet will be working more on all of these issues. But finally, one thing that I want to end with without undermining the issue of data collection is data is not everything. There's so many other things we should have in mind. And I'm going back to the spoken word poetry from this morning. Data is about numbers. We must never forget that it's about people. It's about individual stories. It's about narratives. And we should take all of that together to speak about discrimination and speak about it and do and work on it in order to change things. And we do it in cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. You really managed to put the whole day into a very structural. It was really. I was taken actually. Can I ask you something? Because
Sure.
you said change is on the ground, and I mean you are a person with a lot of power in one hand because you are. I mean you're the chair of Equinet. You're also an ombudswoman. You are an ombudswoman of not only one institution, but you actually have 5 mandates. So, after a day like this, if you would go back and you would say change on the ground, do you have something you've taken with you that have made you realize, okay, there's something I will change or that I want to do after this day, that a perspective, something that surprised you, something you will take with you back from here?
All of the above. Everything I mentioned as an issue, as a challenge, is something that you need to then take home and realize, are we doing it right? Self-question, question the way we're doing things, and then do them better. The only point, I think, of going to conferences like this and discussing is if you get back home and then actually start doing things differently. Otherwise, we can just be speaking at conferences.
And the next, if there is one thing that has not been mentioned today and that we should have perhaps a conference on even more next time, I know one thing I know you know quite a lot about is actually the question of AI, and it has been mentioned a couple of times, but is there any reflection on AI if we're thinking about equality data? And well, we won't have time to speak about today, but perhaps for the next conference that Lars will be arranging soon.
Definitely, and to such a great extent that I cannot state this strongly enough. As Equinet, we have been working on the effects of AI on equality for years now. We have a group of experts from equality bodies working on it. We've commissioned a report, we've exchanged and so on. We've done comments on the EU Artificial Intelligence Act, and we've also become an observer in CAI, which is the Committee on Artificial Intelligence, which is currently drafting the framework, potential future framework convention within the Council of Europe. And I've also taken part in that as a co-representative of the European Commission on Racism and Intolerance of the Council of Europe. What I can tell you is AI can and will potentially be used for good when we're looking at data. So that's great. But the potential for misuse is just huge. And if we're doing data collection in a wrong way, we are already feeding AI with biased data, which can lead to huge problems. And I'm not going to cite my favorite dystopian shows or speak about Black Mirror or something about that, but without sounding too negative, as people with vested interests in equality, I think we should really focus on the effects of AI. Everything which is happening now has the potential of being much, much, much more difficult, but also more difficult to know and more difficult to prove. The issue mentioned by Rosalina from the Netherlands is just one potential use. I don't want to speak about, predictive policing or using AI, facial recognition, or various other issues in problematic ways. But this is something that we should, those who have not started working on this should start very soon.
Thank you, Tina.
Sure.
Thank you.